The man who chased a cheap imitation and lost his queen. Stop. Before we unveil this dramatic saga, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments what happens when a man who cruelly dismisses his pregnant wife for a younger model suddenly finds himself front row to witness her spectacular return. Get ready for a story about ambition, devastating regret, and the high cost of choosing power over passion. Part 1. The brutal choice. The trade-off. 3 years ago, Julian Hayes had reached the pinnacle of his world and convinced himself he was making the most rational decision of his life. At just 32, he was already the CEO of a rapidly ascending tech corporation, a man with investors pursuing him, journalists writing glowing profiles about his ambition and brilliance, and employees who admired and feared him in equal measure. Yet, in the quiet hours, when the spotlights dimmed and the noise of meetings and deals vanished, his thoughts always returned to Evelyn. She wasn't from his world of boardrooms and contracts. She worked as a photographer, someone who saw life through a lens rather than financial charts. And she had a way of pulling him down from the clouds into something real and grounding. With her, he laughed without calculation, spoke without rehearsal, and felt human instead of a title. She had chestnut hair that glowed red in the sun and eyes so intensely blue that he frequently told her they were the only color that could silence his restless mind. But when Victoria Sterling entered the scene, everything changed. She was the daughter of a powerful business tycoon, a woman who carried influence the way others carried bags, effortlessly and with devastating effect. At galas, she sparkled. At conferences, she was always the center of the room, and when she fixed her eyes on Julian, she did so with intent. To him, she presented a partnership that went far beyond romance. Joining their lives meant joining empires, connecting his rising firm to her family's vast network of wealth and political power. Every advisor around him whispered it was a move he couldn't afford to ignore. Marrying Victoria would guarantee the kind of stability most men in his position could only dream of. Evelyn sensed it long before he admitted it. She saw him become distant, not because he loved her less, but because he was measuring himself against the expectations of the world he had built. He came home late, distracted, his phone constantly vibrating with messages he wouldn't let her see. She asked him once, gently, if he was happy. He kissed her forehead, avoided her gaze, and told her he was fine. But the lie trembled between them like glass about to shatter. In her heart, she already knew she was losing him. Not to another woman's beauty, but to ambition wearing a human face. When the choice finally arrived, it was brutal in its simplicity. Julian told her he had to think about the future, that love wasn't enough to build the empire he envisioned, that marrying Victoria was not betrayal, but strategy. The words burned his tongue, even as he said them, but he forced them out, convincing himself he was acting with discipline, with vision, with the cold clarity of a leader. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't beg. She listened, her face pale, her hands trembling only once as she folded the letter she had been writing to him. Words of encouragement and devotion that no longer mattered. She placed it on the table, whispered that she wished him happiness, even if it wasn't with her, and walked out with her shoulders straight, though her heart was breaking. That night, Julian sat in his penthouse, overlooking the shimmering Manhattan skyline, surrounded by a silence more suffocating than any crowded boardroom. He told himself he had done the right thing, that Evelyn was a chapter of his life belonging to a different, weaker man who dreamed instead of conquered. But when he closed his eyes, he could still see her face, still hear her voice calling his name in the darkness, and it left an empty echo inside him that not even the applause of success could fill. Part 2. The Silent Sacrifice. Evelyn left without making a scene, without screaming or hurling accusations, because she knew there was no point fighting for a man who had already convinced himself that walking away was noble. She packed her few belongings into a suitcase, stored photographs and mementos that once meant something, and walked out of the apartment they had shared, as if erasing herself from his world would somehow make the pain easier to bear. It didn't. The nights were long, the silence heavy, and there were moments when she wanted nothing more than to call him, to beg him to remember the life they had dreamed together. But her pride and wounded heart kept her still. She told herself she deserved more than to be the woman left behind for a business deal, even if part of her still loved him with every breath. It was only weeks later, when the morning sickness began to overwhelm her and exhaustion pulled her down at odd hours of the day, that she realized her body carried a secret too powerful to ignore. The doctor confirmed what her instincts already whispered. She was pregnant. She sat in the small clinic looking at the blurry black and white image on the monitor, and her heart clenched with a mixture of fear and overwhelming tenderness. The baby growing inside her wasn't just hers. It was his, Julian's, the man who had broken her, the man she still loved, the man who would never know. She couldn't bring herself to disrupt the life he had chosen. She imagined telling him, imagined the shock on his face, perhaps even the regret. But she also imagined Victoria's triumphant smile and the way the world would view her confession as desperate, manipulative, an attempt to pull him back. That thought sealed her silence. She would not beg for a place in his life, even if it meant raising their child alone. The pregnancy was hard, not medically, but in the sheer weight of loneliness. Evelyn worked as much as she could, saving every penny, forcing herself to be strong when her body ached and her emotions threatened to drown her. She painted the nursery alone, soft pastel colors that made the small room glow with warmth, and every brushstroke was both a promise and a prayer that she could do this on her own. When Serafina was born, with her golden curls and eyes so intensely blue they nearly took Evelyn's breath away, she felt both broken and whole. The first cry filled the sterile hospital room, and in that sound, Evelyn found her reason to continue, even on the darkest days. The years that followed were not easy. Evelyn learned to juggle late-night feedings with freelance photography jobs, to soothe a fever while answering client emails, to smile when she wanted to collapse. She took Serafina to the park, the library, to small cafes where she could sip coffee while her daughter colored napkins with crayons. People frequently stopped her to admire the child's beauty, and every time someone commented on Serafina's eyes, Evelyn's heart tightened. They were Julian's eyes, undeniable, a constant reminder of the man she had lost and the choice he had made. Yet she never uttered his name to her daughter, never allowed bitterness to poison the bond between them. Instead, she told Serafina that her father was far away, that life had simply written a different story for them, and that love could still be found in the simplest moments of laughter and closeness. Part 3. The Hollow Victory. Julian's life with Victoria unfolded exactly as the world expected, yet never in the way his heart craved. Their marriage was a performance, a carefully orchestrated union designed for cameras, shareholders, and political circles, not for love. They hosted galas at their Hamptons mansion, where laughter sounded like tinkling crystal, but never reached his soul. They vacationed in places so luxurious they seemed like paintings, yet Julian often felt like an imposter in the frame. Victoria played her part flawlessly, her blonde hair gleaming under the chandeliers, her smile polished and perfect, her hand always graciously resting on his arm, as if she owned him. And perhaps she did. But in the moments when the parties ended and the doors closed, the silence hung between them, heavy and unbreakable, She spoke of connections, of alliances, of business ventures. He listened, agreeing when necessary, but inside he was haunted by a hollow ache that no amount of success could erase. Every morning, Julian woke up in sheets that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. Yet he missed the simple scent of Evelyn's hair against his shoulder. He remembered the way she used to wake before him, running her fingers gently through his hair, as if he were a man, not a CEO, and how she whispered dreams for their future with a warmth that needed no audience. Those memories were both comfort and torment. In the light of day, he silenced her with work, plunging into endless meetings, flying to foreign cities, shaking hands with leaders whose eyes carried the same hunger as his. But when he came home, the emptiness grew sharper. Victoria never asked how his day really was. She wanted numbers, projections, results, and he gave them to her because that was what she had married him for. Meanwhile, Evelyn's life was different in every possible way, yet infinitely more alive. Her apartment was modest, its walls adorned not with rare art, but with her daughter's drawings. There were mornings filled with spilled cereal and laughter, afternoons in the park chasing butterflies, nights spent reading picture books aloud until her voice was hoarse. She struggled constantly, juggling bills, working late on photography projects, worrying about daycare tuition. But within her struggles was meaning. Serafina's small arms around her neck, the way the child's laughter filled every corner of her home, gave Evelyn a sense of purpose that no amount of wealth could have bestowed. She carried exhaustion in her body, but love gave her strength. The contrast between Julian's glittering cage and Evelyn's humble, more vibrant world couldn't have been starker. He lived surrounded by riches, but starved for meaning, while she lived in constant struggle, but fueled by the boundless joy of raising a child. He walked through rooms full of people, but felt alone, while she, though solitary, never felt empty because Serafina filled every void. And while Julian told himself he had chosen wisely, aligning with Victoria's power to secure his empire, in the deepest corners of his soul, he began to question if the cost had been too high. He didn't know it yet, but life was preparing to confront him with the truth in the most unexpected and irreversible way. Part 4. The Queen's Return. The hotel ballroom was alive with the kind of energy Julian had grown accustomed to, but never truly embraced. Crystal chandeliers poured light over white tablecloths, conversation mingled with the notes of a string quartet, and the air was thick with perfume and ambition. He moved through the crowd with Victoria at his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her laughter bright but hollow, rehearsed for those listening. She thrived in such environments, shining under the admiration of investors, politicians, and high society wives, while Julian played his part as the confident CEO, exchanging firm handshakes and carefully chosen words. To everyone else, he looked like a man who had everything. Internally, he was exhausted, his soul restless in the cage of perfection he had built. It happened when he turned to look across the room, his gaze wandering over strangers and colleagues until it stopped, frozen, as if time itself had stumbled. Near the fountain, by the corner where the crowd thinned, was Evelyn. She hadn't changed so much that he couldn't recognize her, but she had grown into a calmer strength. Her chestnut hair cascaded over her shoulders, her figure draped in a simple, elegant dress that made her look effortlessly radiant. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't surrounded by admirers. She simply stood there, composed, as if the chaos of the ballroom belonged to another world. And in her arms, nestled with a tenderness that pierced him, was a little girl. At first, Julian couldn't breathe. He thought his eyes were deceiving him, that the wine in his glass had clouded his senses. But then the child turned, golden curls catching the light, and he saw her face, a tiny reflection of himself, softened by Evelyn's warmth, yet unmistakably his. Those blue eyes, his eyes, looked up at Evelyn with innocent trust, and the ground beneath him shook. His chest seized, his heart pounding so hard he wondered if anyone could hear it. Victoria's voice tried to pull him back, something about an approaching business partner, a name he should remember, but her words dissolved into the air. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, trapped in the gravity of that moment. Evelyn had noticed him now, her gaze steady, calm in a way that stung more than anger ever could. She didn't look away. She didn't falter. She simply held her daughter closer, as if bracing for the storm she knew was inevitable. Julian felt 100 impulses rush forward at once. He wanted to cross the room, to demand answers, to touch the child's cheek and confirm what his heart was already screaming was true. But his feet refused. Fear, guilt, shock. They entangled around him until he stood like a suited statue, externally composed, internally collapsing. His mind replayed every moment of the last 3 years. The night he let Evelyn go, the silence that followed, the emptiness he carried like a shadow. Now he understood. He hadn't just lost her, he had lost a part of himself, and she had been living in Evelyn's arms all along. When the night finally dragged to an end, Julian could barely recall the speeches he gave, the hands he shook, the smiles he forced. He felt as if he were moving through water, heavy and murky, every nerve straining toward the image of Evelyn and the child who mirrored him. In the quiet of his suite later that night, he stood at the window, looking out at the glittering city, and pressed his palms against the glass as if it could anchor him. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't even close his eyes without seeing them. And in the hours before dawn, one thought consumed him, sharper than any boardroom battle, louder than any applause he had ever received. He had a daughter, and he had been living in ignorance. The truth had arrived like lightning, destroying the facade he had spent years building, and nothing would ever be the same. What would you do in Julian's place? Would you confront Evelyn immediately, or try to win her back first? Tell us your strategy in the comments. Please, if this story resonates with you, give it a like and subscribe for the next crucial part. Part 5. The Confession. Julian didn't sleep a single minute after the gala. He lay in the darkness of the hotel suite with Victoria beside him, her breathing steady, her body turned away, while his thoughts assaulted him with a merciless clarity. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Evelyn's face. No longer the young woman he had left behind, but someone stronger, steadier, with a quiet dignity that unsettled him. And then there was the child, the girl with golden hair and blue eyes so identical to his that denial was impossible. The image burned through him until dawn, and with it came a decision he had been too afraid to make the night before. He had to find her. He had to know the truth, told not by suspicion or a haunting resemblance, but by her lips, firm and undeniable. The next morning, Julian dispatched Victoria with some excuse about meetings, ignoring the ice in her glare. He drove through the city like a man possessed, tracking down connections, old addresses, and instinct, until finally he stopped in front of a modest townhouse, so far removed from the marble and glass of his own world that he felt like he was entering another life. He stood on the threshold longer than he should have, his heart hammering in his chest, his hand trembling when he finally raised it to knock. For a moment, he wished she wouldn't answer, that the truth would remain hidden behind the wooden door. But then it opened, and Evelyn stood before him. She didn't look surprised. If anything, her eyes held the calm of someone who had expected this day and prepared for it. She wore no mask of anger, nor did she show fear. Just a guarded stillness that shook him more than fury ever could. Behind her, he glimpsed children's shoes near the door, drawings taped to the wall, the unmistakable signs of a home built with love and sacrifice. His throat tightened, the words threatening to choke him. But finally, he managed to speak. "Is she mine?" The question emerged as a plea, raw and broken. Evelyn's gaze did not waver. Her silence stretched between them, forcing him to feel every second of the years he had missed, every untold bedtime story, every scraped knee he hadn't bandaged. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, she is your daughter, Serafina." Her voice was calm, firm, but it carried a weight heavier than any accusation. Julian stumbled back as if struck. His breath hitched, his hands shaking at his sides. He wanted to rage, to collapse, to fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. But all he could do was whisper, "Why didn't you tell me?" Evelyn's expression shifted, the slightest hint of pain flickering across her face, but she didn't look away. "Because you made your choice. You chose her. You chose the deal, the power, the future you thought you needed. I wasn't going to force myself into that world. Not for me, not for her. I wasn't going to beg for a place in your life when you had already closed the door." Her words cut him with more precision than any argument could. He realized then that his silence, his cowardice, had stolen not just years from Evelyn, but from his own child, and no amount of wealth or status could buy them back. Inside the house, he could hear a small voice call out, the sound of a child waking up. Julian's entire body ached with the instinct to step inside, to see her, to touch her. But Evelyn's stance told him he wasn't yet allowed. She stood between him and that world, a guardian who had carried everything alone while he had lived behind glass walls of ambition. He bowed his head, struggling to control the storm of emotions that threatened to undo him. Shame burned in his chest, guilt gnawed at his stomach, and yet, beneath it all, was something terrifying in its intensity. Hope. The hope that perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice lower now, but still firm. "I never lied to you. I never hid her to hurt you. I simply protected us. You walked away, Julian, and I learned to live without you." She took a slight step back, not in an invitation, but a finality, as if her words were the last barrier she needed to place between them. Julian nodded slowly, his eyes burning with unshed tears he had never allowed himself before. "I was blind," he admitted, his voice raw. "I thought I was making the right choice. I thought love wasn't enough, but I see her, and I know I have been living a lie." He turned then, because he couldn't bear to completely fall apart in front of her. He walked down the steps like an exiled man, the weight of the years pressing down on his shoulders. On the drive back, he saw Victoria waiting at the house, her silhouette framed in the window, and for the first time, he looked at her with clarity instead of habit. The life he had built with her was a prison forged of ambition and cowardice. Now, the bars had shattered, and though what lay beyond terrified him, he knew there was no turning back. Part 6. The Redemption's Path. That night, Julian lay awake again, staring at the ceiling of a house that no longer felt like his own. The truth had changed everything. He wasn't just a man, not just a husband to a woman he could never love, not just a CEO bound to an empire. He was a father, and the thought consumed him with a force so undeniable that he knew his life would never again be measured in contracts and profits. The question was, did he have the courage to fight for the family he had once thrown away? The days that followed were a storm that spread from closed doors to the full light of day. Julian had lived long enough under the scrutiny of business papers and society columns to know what it meant when whispers became headlines. But nothing had prepared him for the ferocity with which the story of his unraveling marriage to Victoria consumed the press. She was not a woman accustomed to losing. And when she realized his determination to leave her was no longer one of their cyclical arguments but a decision set in stone, she unleashed every weapon at her disposal. She cried on camera. She accused him of infidelity in interviews. She played the part of the perfect wife abandoned for no reason. And for a while, the world bought it. But the cracks showed quickly, because truth always finds a way to seep in, even through the most carefully constructed lies. Business partners whispered about her ruthless manipulations. Old acquaintances recalled her calculated charm. And soon, the sympathy she tried to evoke soured into suspicion. Julian watched it all with a kind of disinterested numbness, no longer caring about the gossip pages or the speculation, because for the first time in years, the cage around him had sprung open, and the only thing that mattered was what lay outside. The legal battle was vicious. Victoria fought not for love, which had never existed between them, but for control, for money, for the satisfaction of leaving scars that might outlast her presence. Courtrooms became stages where her voice rose and cracked, where lawyers argued over assets and reputations, where Julian sat in silence and let the storm rage, because he no longer felt the need to defend a life that had already collapsed. His only fear was not of losing fortune or influence, but of losing the fragile opportunity he had glimpsed in Evelyn's eyes when she had admitted the truth about Serafina. When the divorce was finalized and Victoria finally lost control, the liberation was not triumphant, but quiet. Julian signed the final documents with hands that shook, not from fear, but from the enormity of what it meant. For years, he had played the husband in a loveless union, convincing himself that duty and ambition justified the emptiness in his chest. Now he was free, but freedom came with its own burden. He knew he couldn't simply walk into Evelyn's world and expect forgiveness or acceptance. He had forfeited that right long ago. All he could do was show her that he had changed, not with promises or excuses, but with persistence, patience, and a willingness to endure rejection, if that was all she had to give. At first, Evelyn kept her distance, her tone polite but firm when he asked to see Serafina. She made it clear that his place in their daughter's life would not be given lightly, that trust had to be earned not with grand gestures, but with consistent presence. Julian accepted her terms, even when it hurt. He showed up humbly, sometimes standing at her door with nothing more than a book he thought Serafina might like, or a small toy he had chosen after walking through store aisles in confusion, trying to imagine what would bring a smile to her face. The first visits were awkward. Serafina was shy, clinging to Evelyn's leg, peering at him with wide eyes, as if trying to decide what to make of this stranger who looked so much like her. Julian felt clumsy, unsure how to reassure, how to speak with a voice gentle enough to bridge the distance between them. But slowly, over time, her hesitation faded. An afternoon at the park marked a turning point. Serafina ran ahead, her curls bouncing as she laughed, and Julian followed, his heart pounding with the fear that she might fall, that he might fail her in some way he couldn't yet predict. She stumbled at the edge of the path and scraped her knee, and before Evelyn could move, Julian was there, gently lifting her, whispering comfort with words he didn't know he remembered, wiping the dirt from her skin, and holding her close until her tears gave way to sniffles and laughter. Evelyn looked at them, her eyes softening against her will, and in that moment Julian felt a small measure of redemption. He wasn't forgiven, not yet, but he was being allowed to try. The weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of his visits wove into the fabric of their lives. He learned to braid hair with clumsy fingers until Serafina declared he was getting better. He built crooked Lego castles, that tumbled only for them to rebuild together. He read bedtime stories in a voice that grew steadier with practice. Every evening he spent with her was both a joy and a torment, because every moment was precious, but underscored by the knowledge of all the years he had missed. Evelyn, cautious but fair, began to relax her guard. She saw the sincerity in his efforts, the way he never missed a visit, never grew impatient, never tried to buy her affection with wealth. What he offered instead was presence, humility, and the gradual molding of himself into a father she could believe in. The divorce scandal eventually faded, replaced by new headlines, new distractions for the world. But for Julian, the real story wasn't what people wrote in magazines, but the quiet transformation happening in the corners of a modest home, where laughter echoed, where the walls were lined with crayon drawings instead of expensive art, where the air smelled of pancakes instead of perfume. He realized he had spent years chasing applause that meant nothing, when the sound of his daughter's laughter was the only ovation he ever truly needed. And as he walked her to the park one afternoon, her small hand gripping his tightly, he understood that the life he was building now wasn't a second act, but the beginning of something entirely new, fragile and uncertain, but more real than in anything he had known for. Part 7. The Unwavering Bond. Serafina, or Seraph as she was affectionately named, welcomed Julian into her life with the natural innocence only a child could possess. At first, her curiosity was quiet, her glances hesitant, her tiny hand clutching Evelyn whenever he entered the room. But children have a way of seeing past what adults cannot. It was as if some part of her already recognized him, not just in the color of her eyes that mirrored his, but in the unspoken bond that connected them. Slowly, the walls of shyness gave way to giggles, and soon she was pulling on his arm, asking him to build towers, to play tag, to braid her doll's hair. Julian, who had once signed multi-million-dollar contracts with firm confidence, found his hands trembling as he awkwardly tied ribbons into her curls, only to be met with peals of laughter and the proud declaration that he was getting better. These moments, mundane to anyone else, carried the weight of miracles for him. Evenings became their most treasured hours. Seraph would climb into his lap, a book almost too heavy for her small arms, demanding he read it again and again until the words were lodged in his mind. At first, his voice was too formal, too flat. But under her expectant gaze, he softened, trying silly voices and dramatic pauses that made her giggle until she pressed her face against his chest. He learned that what mattered wasn't the story itself, but the firmness of his presence, the warmth of his arms around her, the reassurance that he would still be there when the last page was turned. Evelyn watched it all from a careful distance. Her heart had been hardened by years of solitude and disillusionment, and she wouldn't allow herself the luxury of quick forgiveness. She saw him struggle through the simple routines she had long mastered alone, saw frustration cross his face when he failed at something as small as buttoning a stubborn coat button, and yet he never gave up, never walked away, never let his pride interfere with the fragile steps he was taking toward fatherhood. It was in these small acts of humility that Evelyn's resolve began to crack. She saw a man who wasn't trying to buy his way into their lives with gifts or grand promises, but one who was learning to bend, to adapt, to prove through patience and persistence that he was more than the shadow who had walked away. For Julian, the transformation was relentless and consuming. Every day with Seraph taught him more about himself than years of boardrooms and business victories ever had. He learned that love wasn't a grand declaration, but a series of small, consistent choices. Showing up even when exhausted, listening to her endless stream of questions about the world, kneeling in the dirt to help her plant flowers she insisted would grow faster if he whispered to them. Part 8. The Truth of Home. The Meaningful Ending. Seraph's preschool graduation morning dawned with sunlight streaming through thin curtains, and Julian found himself standing in front of the mirror, straightening a tie he rarely wore outside of business meetings. This was different now, though. This wasn't for investors or journalists. This was for his daughter, who had spent the last week telling him over and over that he had to look handsome, like a real daddy, when she walked across the stage. When he arrived at Evelyn's house to pick them up, he was greeted by the sight of Seraph spinning clumsily in her little white dress, a paper crown she had made herself already slipping sideways on her head. She ran to him with unrestrained excitement, arms open, and he swept her into his arms as her laughter filled the hallway. Evelyn stood nearby, her expression calm but softened, her hair cascading loosely around her shoulders, dressed simply, but with an elegance that struck him with a force more powerful than any memory. When Seraph's name was called, she walked across the stage with determined little steps, securing her certificate as if it were treasure, and Julian felt his throat tighten with an emotion so strong it nearly choked him. He had closed billion-dollar deals without wavering, but watching his daughter secure a piece of paper decorated with stickers made him feel like he had just witnessed the greatest triumph of his life. After the ceremony, the three of them lingered outside in the warm afternoon air, Seraph bouncing between them, eager to show off her certificate. Julian carried her on his shoulders, while Evelyn walked beside them, her hand occasionally brushing his as Seraph moved overhead. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic gesture, but the simplicity of it, a family walking together, laughing together, hit Julian with more power than any victory he had ever claimed. Later that night, after Seraph had finally fallen asleep, Julian and Evelyn found themselves on the porch in the quiet of the fading day. For a long time they sat in silence, each lost in thought. Finally, Julian turned to her, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of the years. He told her he didn't want to lose any more time, that he wanted to build something lasting, not out of ambition or obligation, but out of love and the truth they had fought so hard to reclaim. He suggested a weekend away, a simple trip to the mountains where they could leave behind the city noise and give Seraph memories filled with laughter, nature, and peace. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp but no longer guarded, and then she smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She said yes to Julian, that yes meant more than any contract he had ever signed. It wasn't just permission for a trip, it was an opening, a sign that the walls Evelyn had built to protect herself were finally softening. He felt a warmth spread through him, not the fleeting satisfaction of a deal won, but the lasting peace of belonging. In that moment, he realized that home wasn't a place, not the sprawling mansion he had once lived in, not the office towers that bore his company's name, but the people beside him now. The woman whose strength had carried what he had abandoned, and the child who had invited him, without question, into her world. He understood that being broken didn't mean the end. Sometimes it meant starting over, with deeper roots and stronger walls built from the lessons of the past. And as he reached for her hand, feeling her fingers rest lightly on his, he knew that what they were creating wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in years, he felt fearless about the future. He was no longer walking alone. Part 9. The Mountain Retreat. A weekend of truth. The cabin in the Cascade Mountains was everything Evelyn had dreamed of. Rustic, quiet, and far removed from the cold ambition of the city. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the scent of pine filled the air. Julian, the billionaire CEO who used to sign multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, now stood awkwardly trying to assemble a child's toy fishing rod, his movements stiff with disuse. Serafina, or Seraph, watched him with patient curiosity. "Daddy, the instruction says to twist the handle first," Seraph instructed, pointing to the diagram with a sticky finger. A slow smile spread across Julian's face. "Right. Strategy first, brute force second." "Thank you, Seraph." Evelyn watched from the kitchen, where she was making hot cocoa. The sight of them, Julian, humbled and focused, and Seraph, confidently guiding him, was a small miracle. It wasn't just a trip, it was a test of whether the man who chose ambition could truly choose them when the world wasn't watching. That afternoon, they took a short hike. Seraph held Julian's hand tightly, pointing out mossy rocks and whispering secrets to the trees. Julian, who used to ignore the natural world, now knelt to inspect a small purple flower, answering Seraph's endless why questions with genuine interest. Later, as Seraph slept soundly in the small loft above, Julian and Evelyn sat by the crackling fire. The silence was no longer awkward, but heavy with unspoken history. "Thank you for this," Evelyn said quietly, looking into the flames. "For bringing her here." "I brought you both here," Julian corrected, his voice low. He picked up the silver heart pendant, the other half of the necklace set, which he still carried. "I told you I was blind when I chose Victoria. I chose the idea of power over the truth of love." Evelyn nodded, her gaze distant. "It wasn't just the choice, Julian. It was the silence, the way you allowed me to just vanish." Julian closed his eyes, leaning back against the rough wood of the sofa. "I deserved that silence. But it was also fear. I was terrified of failing the empire I had built. I was a coward. I mistook ambition for strength. When I look at Seraph, all I see are the years I lost, the father I failed to be." "You can't get those years back," Evelyn whispered, turning to face him. "But you can choose what you do with this moment. I see you trying, Julian. I see you listening, not just hearing." Julian put the silver heart down on the mantelpiece, its soft gleam catching the firelight. He reached across and took Evelyn's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar curve of her palm. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but an admission of need, of connection. "Evelyn," he said, his blue eyes searching hers. "I love her, fiercely, and I need you to know that the man who walked away 3 years ago is gone. He crumbled the moment I saw her face. But what about us? Can we ever rebuild what you lost? What I destroyed?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She felt the warmth of his hand, the sincerity in his touch. The scars were still there, deep and painful, but the wound was closing. "I don't know, Julian," she finally admitted, her voice soft with lingering doubt. "But for Seraph, for us, I'm willing to find out." "What do you think? After all the pain, can Evelyn ever truly trust Julian again? Or is she risking her heart for a dream that might break again?" Share your advice for Evelyn in the comments. If you believe in second chances, give this video a like and subscribe for the dramatic conclusion. Part 10. The Promise of Forever. The final morning in the mountains was clear and cold. Julian woke up before anyone, his mind unusually peaceful. He slipped out to the porch and found Evelyn there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold. He brought her a mug of hot coffee and sat beside her. "I called my team this morning," Julian said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I transferred the majority of my shares into a blind trust and promoted a long-term director to CEO." Evelyn slowly lowered her mug, shock registering in her eyes. "Julian, why? Your empire—" "It was a gilded cage, Evelyn, and it cost me everything that mattered." He looked at her, his expression resolute. I don't need a boardroom to be a leader. I need to be here. I need to lead this family. He then took a small, velvet box from his pocket. It wasn't the kind of gigantic diamond Victoria would have worn. It was a simple, bespoke platinum ring with 3 small, perfectly matched sapphires, the deep blue of Serafina's eyes. This isn't about rushing back to what we had, he clarified, his voice filled with emotion. It's about the future we will build. A future where I am a constant, where I am present, and where I commit every moment to being the father and partner you both deserve. He opened the box, the sapphires glittering in the morning light. No more running, no more ambition over family. Just us, one day at a time. Evelyn Harper, I forfeited the right to ask this years ago, but I have to try. Will you start building a new life with me? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of relief, not sorrow. He wasn't just asking her back. He was dismantling the core of the man who had abandoned her and offering something entirely new. She looked at the 3 sapphires, the constant reminder of their 3 lives now bound together. She reached out and gently touched his cheek. I don't know if I can ever forget the past, Julian, but I can choose the future. Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I will build this new life with you. Julian slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. It wasn't just a symbol of marriage, but a solemn promise of redemption and commitment. As the sun fully rose, casting a golden light over the mountains, they embraced, not with the fire of young love, but with the quiet, unshakable strength of 2 people who had survived a storm and chosen to stand together in the calm that followed. Their journey back was far from over, but for the first time, Julian, Evelyn, and Serafina were walking it together. The final word, Julian Hayes paid the highest price for his ambition, losing the woman he loved and 3 years of his daughter's life. But through humility and the ultimate sacrifice, choosing family over his empire, he found a path to redemption, proving that true power lies not in controlling the world, but in committing to the ones who matter most. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you loved this story, remember to like and share. Let us know what you thought of Julian's final choice in the comments.